Welcome to our 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days preview show, along with ACSA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations, Edgar Zazwata. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you here on our preview show. We're going to go through the main subject matter buckets today as you get set to advocate here on Legislative Action Days. Edgar, welcome. Honored to have you with us. I want to, before we jump into the subject matter buckets, I just want you to talk about the importance of advocacy. Our members have been so pivotal when it's come to legislation, when it's come to executive orders, when it's come to just kind of creating that pathway for students to be able to continue quality education here in California throughout the pandemic. And this is that opportunity for our members to continue to shape what public education looks like for the next year and for the years forthcoming.
Thanks, Naj. I mean, before we jump into it, I have to say, you and I spend a lot of time here in screens next to each other. It does feel a little weird to be doing this recorded as opposed to having people jump in there. But, I guess it's you and me for now until others jump in. So
right.
I'll just have to deal with that for a few minutes there. No, I think it's a great point, Naj, that you brought up. I think it's a great question. Leg Action Day, in this case, we're expanding that opportunity, has been a staple, I think, of our programming at ACSA. For as long as we've done this, right? And before the pandemic, one of the, I think both of our highlights was that day of bringing folks to Sacramento and really literally having the Capitol being taken over by our administrators from around the state. You'd see them in the hallways, we'd set up the tents. It was a powerful, energizing day. Obviously, last year we had to pivot because of the constraints on the health side. This year, as much as we were eager to jump back in and to maybe go back to our in-person opportunity, we did decide to continue this in a virtual format because of not just the health situation, but some of the realities that we're facing in the field. And this kind of is a nice tie-in to some of our advocacy points, that it's been a difficult, not only year, frankly, it's been what we say a lot, 3 years, 3 school years that have been impacted by the pandemic. And we're still feeling that. And frankly, we're still going to be feeling some of those consequences in the years to come. And I think that's why it is so important for us to take a moment, our members to take a moment out of their extremely busy schedules to really make sure that the policymakers fully understand the challenges and also think about some of the potential solutions that ACSA is offering up. So I'm really excited. As much as I miss seeing people in person, as we've learned the last couple of years, the virtual offerings give us some opportunities that we don't have in person. One of this is talking to our members, doing a recording, sending it out beforehand. Our folks are always good students. They always worry about capturing every little detail. But what we say every year, Naj, they're the experts. What we're really doing here is just facilitating an opportunity for them to tell their stories.
Yeah, and that you just said it right there. Storytelling is so important when it comes to advocacy. And we're going to bring on members from the ACSA Governmental Relations Department in just a moment to talk about what our members are going to be talking about during the Legislative Action Days. Edgar, let's go through some of the subject matter buckets that we're going to be talking about in this broadcast. What our members are going to be advocating for when they go and talk with lawmakers.
Yeah, it goes without saying, when we put folks in front of our legislators, policymakers, other key officials in Sacramento or in DC for that matter, there's a ton that we can talk about. There's a ton, we could spend all day talking about the challenges that the system is facing. What we've done this year, as we've done in previous years, we've tried to summarize these in 3 general buckets. And it's around, really, this is not ACSA staff making this up. This is a result of the feedback we've been getting from you folks, whether it be the lunch break, whether it be our individual committees and councils, our meetings that we have every week, just in our interactions with our members. We've tried to summarize these in some larger pots. The first one is kind of every Leg Action Day always has a fiscal issue, because I've yet, regardless of the revenues, regardless of the support we've gotten, I've yet to meet an administrator who say, yeah, we're good. We don't need any more resources. Our students are, have everything they need. We still have a lot of challenges there, right? So I think the first one is trying to get the legislators to think about that. And we've kind of put this in the bucket of trying to mitigate the growing costs that schools are facing, and also addressing some of the issues that do relate to the pandemic, namely ADA and attendance, and giving us some solutions. So in short, we're going to talk about LCFF and really opportunities to boost base funding to make sure that we have continued investment there outside of what's been recommended by the governor, to provide districts some attendance relief, understanding that the state did make some efforts to touch on this, but we need more. And you'll hear this from our team on some proposals to really recognize some of the unique challenges. Like this January, we probably never had a month that looked worse in attendance this January because of the surge. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about independent study. And also one thing that's also on our agenda almost every year is opportunities for pension relief, given that it looks like we're going to have some revenues, that this is an opportunity. The other two buckets are something, again, that we've heard directly from our members. The state has really pushed a lot of new requirements on our folks, things that are good for kids, transitional kindergarten, expanded learning, universal meals. But if these are going to be successful, we need to make sure we focus on implementation. So we're going to talk about some of those issues. Also with that, transition to kindergarten being an example, we need to invest in the infrastructure, namely facilities. So you'll hear that from our team. And then the third bucket is something that will resonate with everybody. Our schools stepped up to the challenge. Our educational leaders stepped up to the challenge. Our educators did over the pandemic. But what the result of some of that was that it took us away from some of the central focus of our schools, which is teaching and learning. Many have said our schools essentially became health centers, health and welfare centers with COVID testing, with all the mitigation efforts in place. And I think if it wasn't for the efforts of our members, schools wouldn't have been able to stay open to the degree that they did. But now that we're hopefully turning this corner, while we can't abandon all those mitigation efforts, we do need to start thinking about how do we transition back to the core function of schools. So we have this bucket about returning educators back to educating. Yeah. How do we get back to the core function of our services? And that's going to be an underlying message of our Advocacy Day.
All right, well, 3 buckets. Let's go ahead and hit the first one. Let's talk about fiscal issues. Megan Baer is ACSA legislative advocate with us today to talk a little bit about the fiscal challenges. Megan, happy to have you with us here on our preview show. Let's go right into the core funding investments. What are we advocating for? What is the request?
Thanks, Naj and Edgar. So, we're hearing from districts across the state several issues. We have districts, many that are experiencing declining enrollment. At the same time, we've seen the most volatile average daily attendance, ADA, that anyone can possibly remember. And so because of that, we are advocating, one of our main points is that we really need fiscal stability so that educators can focus on the students that are in front of them and accelerating their learning. So specifically what we're going to be advocating for and asking is to see an increase to the local control funding formula base calculations. We have a generous COLA at a little over 5%, but in context, inflation's at over 7%. So really we need a much larger investment into the LCFF. Additionally, we're also advocating for COVID attendance relief. This last year, we saw really volatile attendance rates. And so we're specifically requesting the legislature to provide us some relief on that front.
Like we always say, Naj, and I think Megan just underlined this, that it's important. And I always make this joke every year because folks are trying to come in. What are the specifics of the proposal? And we're going to get talking points. Everybody that's seen this today, you've registered on our online learning center. We have extensive talking points there. We have some background materials that'll help folks prepare. But I think the key piece about what Megan talked about is, and you said it, Naj, at the beginning of this, is telling our story. It's that storytelling, right? It's not about the particulars of any advocacy proposal. It's really giving these folks a reality check, who every member of the legislature prides themselves that they're here to advocate for our schools, to advocate for our educators. But we really need to make sure that they really appreciate, even with some of the proposals that they made, why we may need to go a little bit further. And I think that connects to the 2 items that Megan talked about.
Megan, let me go ahead and move to the next ask, which is specifically addressing the unfunded pension liabilities. Let's talk about what we're advocating for related to pension liabilities and what's the request.
Thanks, Naj. Yeah, as we're talking about fiscal stability, we also have to think about our rising mandatory costs, and one of the biggest ones is pension liabilities. So, to the extent that the state provides relief, that frees up additional dollars to support students in the classroom. So, our ask to legislators is for one-time pension liability buy down.
Hey, Megan, let me touch on that because I know this has been something we always ask for, right? Like, I think it's been part of our advocacy platform for a number of years. And I think we've had some success here in recent years of getting the state. Maybe you just touch on that opportunity that now why, this wasn't part of the original January budget, but why do we think that there is some opportunity for this as we move to May revise?
Yeah, absolutely. The governor didn't include it in his proposal like you discussed, but we've actually heard from legislators in both the Senate and Assembly interest in investing in pensions and paying down these liabilities. So we think it's a great opportunity, the LAD, to communicate that would be greatly beneficial to the field and really help us focus on serving students rather than having to dedicate more of our budgets to pension liabilities.
Megan, the governor has, put together a strategy for independent study flexibility. There's a lot out there. Let's talk about broadening independent study flexibility. What are we advocating for, and what's coming next?
Yeah, thank you. So the governor has proposed to make a couple additional flexibilities to the independent study program, and they are, very much appreciated, but they don't go far enough. And this is one of those really important issues that it's great for members to educate legislators on what the reality in the field of the current really burdensome requirements of independent study are. So I'd encourage folks to, give local examples for how challenging it's been under the existing framework. ACSA specifically, we're advocating we need flexibility around signature requirements on documents. We know that there are large groups of parents that are refusing to sign independent study contracts. And then even if their student is still getting served, the district sees a fiscal penalty. So that's a big piece. I think the other big piece is we have to treat quarantining students and students who choose a long-term study program differently. That 15-day cap that short-term independent study has just doesn't work in the best interest of students.
Naj,
All right.
as you know, I'll just point out that our members aren't shy. And I would just really encourage our folks to take Megan's advice here. If there was ever an opportunity to talk about this reality, is we know where we were a year ago and what the legislature envisioned, what the governor's office envisioned on independent study. And there's probably few issues of everything we're going to talk about that garnered more angst and attention than this. So I would encourage folks, tell that story, talk, like Megan said, talk about that reality of how this was intentioned, but how it's played out in many communities.
All right. Megan Baer, ACSA legislative advocate. Megan, it's been great to have you here with us. Looking forward to having you join us on Ledge Action Days.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and move topics, Edgar, and let's bring on another member of the ACSA Governmental Relations Department, Diana Vu, ACSA legislative advocate, with us to talk about another couple of subjects. Diana, so good to have you. Let's go ahead and move over to universal transitional kindergarten. This has been a big topic, something that the governor's been advocating for some time right now. Let's talk about what we're advocating for related to universal transitional kindergarten.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Naj. So as we all know, LEAs are facing a whole host of issues that make it difficult to implement UTK and really need the state to provide them with flexibility and resources. The first thing we're going to be asking for is to fund all UTK programs. We know that a new program is going to be a struggle for every single LEA and that each one deserves funding. So the second request is in regards to the teacher shortage right now. It's just a huge obstacle. There's no one to hire. And in particular, for TK teachers, they're required to have 24-hour early education units. Although there is an option for LEAs to qualify the 24 ECE credits with experience instead, we understand that some some may be uncomfortable with it because of the lack of guidance. As a result, we're asking for another delay in the 24 ECE credits. Our third ask is for districts who already provide UTK through expanded TK, but are no longer able to because of a tweak in the law when UTK was implemented. For this, we are advocating for a state to permit LAs to continue admitting all 4-year-olds if they have the capacity to do so. Lastly, facilities continue to be a struggle, and will be for a long time now because it takes years to build and a ton of funding. So we're asking for a specifically $2 billion earmarked just for UTK without the full day restrictions.
Diana, like Diana pointed out, Naj, I mean, I think that this is, again, an issue all year long. We've been hearing about how some communities, frankly, are struggling with this. I think it's worth pointing out, like, the political context here, and something we've been saying all year long. The legislators and the governor are really invested in this. You pointed it out, Naj. This is something that the governor has been talking about for years. Frankly, it was part of his charge, even as he was entering office, as he was a candidate. So I say all this just to underscore it. This is a priority of the state. I know probably there's some of our members who would prefer that they went in a different direction. These requirements are likely here to stay. With that said, what Diana's pointed out is what changes can they make to the implementation plan that might make this more realistic for our members, might make this more viable. So I think we're pointing out some suggestions. Again, broken record here, but tell your story, talk about your unique context. We know we have a number of districts who are struggling with the fact that they're not going to get any funding for transitional kindergarten. This will be an opportunity for them to tell their story and talk about, what the state can do to really make this work for them in terms of implementation.
Well, you've brought up the funding for UTK, and Diana, you had quickly mentioned about adequate facilities for UTK. Let's bring on Dorothy Johnson, another one of our ACSA legislative advocates, to talk a little bit about the issues related to adequate facilities for UTK. Dorothy, I would ask about the bigger issues there related to facilities. What's the ask? What do our members need to know?
Thanks, Naj, and great to see everyone. In addition to the $2 billion ask for UTK specifically, we have ongoing modernization and construction needs. So ACSA is requesting additional dollars outside of Prop 98 to support the current need. It's a $6 billion price tag at least. The state auditor recently released a report backing that up. That's not to say we don't appreciate what the governor has allocated with some general fund revenue for the first time. We're also spending down the remaining Prop 51 facilities bonds. So we need a dedicated source, again, outside of Prop 98 to make sure we can provide our students with healthy, safe, developmentally appropriate classrooms and other facilities.
Naj, if there was ever a year, and we're not usually talking about facilities in this perspective. Oftentimes we're talking about, let's support a state bond, a facilities bond. I mean, what's unique this year is that the state, in put in simple terms, they have so much money that they're going to have to potentially give some of that back. Yeah. And there's provisions that some of that could be used for schools. This is an opportunity on how to really invest on some of this into the facilities, given the infrastructure that's needed across the board on all the programs we've talked about.
Yeah. All right. Diana, so good to have you with us here on our Legislative Action Days preview. We look forward to seeing you over these couple of days for Leg Action Days. Dorothy, let me keep you on so we can talk a little bit about health mandates, limiting health mandates for school enforcement. What do our members need to know about that? What's the ask there?
Yeah, well, we've heard everyone loud and clear, and it's been multiple years now in a row where schools are looked to implement, enforce these public health mandates that are constantly changing, and we're trying to be, adapting to the current risk. And so, what we're asking is that moving forward, any existing enforcement requirements, and for that matter, any new requirements, are shifted back to public health officials so that our educators can get back to educating and making sure students are receiving, the time and the energy And that time and energy isn't spent on testing and reporting. And furthermore, we know that the funding for PPE, for those testing is starting to expire. So if for any reason there's any remaining requirements placed on schools, we need to back that up with resources. And that's either supplies or funding to make sure we can keep our students healthy, our staff healthy, and the rest of the community members, and supporting all of the good work that's been done to get us, as the governor was saying, from the pandemic phase now to the endemic phase.
I know our members will have a lot to say about this topic because we've been hearing it all year. And I think people are eager to, as Dorothy said, to get back to some of the core functions of our schools. One context to keep in mind here is that for a lot of the meetings, folks are going to be meeting with their legislative delegation, right? And here's the reality. Most of the mandates, whether it be masking, COVID testing, the vaccinations, not all of this has come from the legislature. A lot of this has been the administration through executive action putting this forward. With that said, I think that there is a lot of value to just educating our legislators. There are representatives. They may not have a vote on every single one of these pieces, but they definitely influence the process. So really treat this as an education opportunity. And obviously we know that there's some pretty big issues in front of the legislature that I know our folks have some feelings about. I'm sure that'll come up in the context of these conversations, but just keeping in mind that this is multifaceted in terms of who are the decision makers and how can our folks influence this process.
All right. Dorothy Johnson, ACSA legislative advocate. Dorothy, so good to have you here. Looking forward to having you join us for Legislative Action Days. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Edgar, as we get ready to wrap, I want to make sure that I just highlight a couple of things that our members will be able to enjoy on our Legislative Action Days. Of course, we're going to have the presentation of the ACSA Friend of Public Education Award. You and your team have assembled a pretty big lineup of guests that we're going to have over that couple of days. And of course, the regional advocacy activities for our members, our participants. One theme that we have heard, Edgar, as we just wrap this up, storytelling. We say it every year, so it's not something new that we're going to be talking about. But in this case, the opportunity to really have that substantive, localized storytelling about what the last 2 years have looked like in our school communities is the door is open more right now than it probably has ever been. This is that opportunity really for our members to advocate with the real stories of what's really happening in their school communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head, Naj. And I think that we have proven evidence over the last couple of years that this actually has correlated into policy changes. Well, I would venture to say our folks probably are not completely happy with all of the decisions that were made over the last number of years. I will say that our Ledge Action Days last year or before then really did have an impact on some of the final decision making. And folks might remember, last year we were debating about what some of the rules were going to be for quote unquote reopening schools. And I say quote unquote because the reality is a lot of schools stayed open throughout the pandemic because that was their community decision. They were able to put the right mitigations in place to keep kids into in-person instruction. And the situation could have been very different if our folks hadn't spoken up, if our folks hadn't provided their perspective. So I think that's just, folks should really feel like you are the experts. We talk a lot about grassroots advocacy at ACSA. It's really about utilizing the inherent influence they already have. Folks are going to look to them as the experts in this area. And I think just even giving that perspective, telling that story goes a long way.
All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Again, ACSA's 2022 Legislative Action Days. Edgar and I will be taking you through 2 days of rich content, advocacy opportunities, your chance to talk with the lawmakers that make the decisions here in the state. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you for Legislative Action Days.